So the Gemara that we're on page Chaf Zayin Amud Aleph 27a, and the Gemara that we just learned yesterday, we spoke about the law of doing the duchening. That means a kohen blessing the Jewish people. The prohibition for him to do it when he is drunk. We learned about that, and basically, the Gemara wanted to know what the source is, and the Gemara brought Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi in the name of Bar Kapara. He says the reason why the portion of the Kohen is written in the Torah next to the portion of the Nazir, and that is in Parshas Nasai. And the reason why they're juxtaposed is because to tell you that just like a Nazir, a Nazarite, is prohibited in wine, also a Kohen is prohibited, who blesses is prohibited in wine. So the truth of the matter is that's a very complicated type of a way of learning this, because there's some complications here. Number one, a Nazir is prohibited to have to drink anything from the grapevine, and it has nothing to do with being drunk. He can't have grape juice. He can't have grapes. You know, it's not a prohibition of being drunk. And in fact, a person who is drunk already, let's say a person got drunk and they're in their very high state and they decide to accept upon themselves to become a Nazir. So as long as their mind is enough to, to be, that they could say they're logical, as long as their mind is there, so they're high, they would be allowed to become a Nazir while they're in the state of some level of drunkenness, right? However, tipsy, maybe we'll call it. While they're tipsy, they're allowed to accept upon themselves to be a Nazir. A Kohen who's tipsy is not allowed to go and do the duchening. So seemingly the laws are different. In other words, there's some similarity, true, but it's hard to say. And in the end of the Gemara, it actually concludes that we don't really learn it from Nazir. It's not such a smooth type of way of deducing this law. It's not a smooth way of expounding through comparing Nazir to the Kohen. Again, there are major differences between these two laws. But anyway, the Gemara initially wants to say that we learn the laws of blessing the Kohen from the laws of Nazir. And just like here it's prohibited to get drunk, there also wine is prohibited, here also wine is prohibited. In other words, if you just look at the fact that wine is prohibited, you have some type of a limud, you have some type of a understanding, of connection, of comparison. The Gemara asks, of course, the obvious question. It says, Maskif la avua Reb Zera. So the Gemara, the father of Reb Zera, asked this question about, so you're learning from Nazir. What about the grape seeds? And Nazir is prohibited in grape seeds. So maybe a Kohen who's going to bless the Jewish people can't have grape seeds. So the Gemara answers that, well, we have another type of way of expounding from the Torah, and this one is actually in the same. It's a verse that says two things in the same verse. One thing it says is serving Hashem in the Beis Hamikdash, and the other thing it says is blessing the Jewish people. And so since in the same verse it compares the two, so we say that the same law that applies to doing the service in the Beis Hamikdash applies to the Kohen who blesses the Jewish people, because it's in the same verse. And this limud, this comparison that we're taking the laws from one case, comparing it and saying the same law should apply here as well, it comes out from that a kohen would be permitted to have grape seeds because a kohen is allowed to do the service with grape seeds. If he ate grape seeds, he would be allowed to do the service. There's no prohibition. It says he can't be drunk, but it doesn't say he can't eat grapes that have seeds. You can't have grape seeds, but it doesn't say that. So therefore, a kohen that blesses the Jewish people would have the same law, and it would be permissible for them to bless the Jewish people, even if they ate grapes with their seeds, no problem. Or even if he ate just the seeds, no problem. Why? Because a kohen, we're not comparing him to a nazir in a sense of the grape seeds. We're comparing him to a nazir in the sense that can't be drunk. But if you want to ask, well, what about the seeds? A nazir is prohibited in seeds. He's also, a kohen is also compared to someone who does the service in the temple. He's compared to a nazir, but he's also compared to someone who does the service in the temple. And because of that, someone who does the service in the temple is allowed to have grape seeds. So here also a nazir is allowed to have the grape seed. A kohen who blesses the Jewish people is allowed to have grape seeds. Okay. And then the Gemara says, oh, you want to compare him and make the same law that applies to a kohen that does the service in the temple should have the same law as a kohen who blesses the Jewish people. So does that mean that a kohen who has some type of blemish is not going to be allowed to bless the Jewish people? He has some issue where a health issue that is considered a blemish in the Parshas Emor. It talks about all different types of blemishes. So would this be a blemish? Would that be a law that a kohen can't bless the Jewish people? We know that the law is that a kohen, as long as he doesn't have an outright blemish, he is allowed to bless the Jewish people. So if you're comparing him to a kohen that does the service, you're not gonna be able to learn the proper laws. In other words, there's a problem with this limud, with this way of learning it, because there's a problem with comparing a kohen who blesses to a kohen who does the service. There's more laws about a kohen who does the service than a kohen who blesses. A kohen who blesses is much more lenient. So you can't say that we learn the laws of a kohen who blesses the Jewish people from the law of a kohen who does the service in the temple. So the Gemara answers, you know what? That's why we learn the kohen from Nazir. A Nazir is allowed to have blemishes. So you compare him to the Nazir to say that he's allowed to have blemishes, but he's not allowed to be drunk. You compare him to the kohen who does the service in the temple, because the kohen who does the service in the temple is allowed to have grape seeds and other things that are from the grapevine. And the kohen who does the blessing of the Jewish people is allowed to have that. He's just not allowed to be drunk, but he's allowed to have that. So we compare him to both. That's basically what the Gemara says. The only problem with this whole thing is that you're just grabbing any leniency you can find. It's like, oh, it's compared a kohen who does the service, or a kohen, I should say this, a kohen who blesses the Jewish people, what is he allowed to do? What is he not allowed? Well, he's compared to a nazir, and he's compared to a kohen that does the service in the temple. Okay, so in what way is he compared to them? Well, whatever this one is allowed to do, the kohen who blesses the Jewish people is allowed to. Whatever that person is allowed to do, the kohen who blesses the Jewish people is allowed to do. So we're just grabbing any leniency we can find, take all the leniencies from here, take all the leniencies from there, and that's the laws of a kohen who blesses the Jewish people. That sounds a little strange. Why are we only learning the leniencies? If you compare him, you have to compare him in all aspects. Or who tells you to compare just the leniencies? And generally, when we compare, we generally compare and take the stringencies, not the leniencies. So that is the question that the Gemara asks. And the Gemara's answer was, Asmachta ninhu midrabanan ulakula. That's, I think that's where we ended yesterday. That this is an asmachta And yeah, that's where we end. This is an asmachta. This is just something that we're um, getting a little hint, a little support from, but it's really rabbinic. It's really, this is a rabbinic law that a kohen is not allowed to bless the Jewish people when he's drunk, is a rabbinic law. That's what it seems like from the Gemara. And in fact, the Smag learns that it's rabbinic. It sounds to me a little surprising to learn that way, because we know that you generally don't have decrees on a rabbinic law, right? A gzeira legzeira, it's called. You don't make one decree on another decree. And here, the rabbis prohibited him to be drunk. The rabbis prohibited a kohen who's blessing the Jewish people to be drunk. And then our Gemara earlier mentioned different decrees that we have, like you're not allowed to do berchas koyanim at mincha. So to me, it's surprising that if you learn berchas koyanim is only rabbinic, why would we be making extra decrees on that law? Normally, a rabbinic law doesn't have decrees on top of it. The other way of learning our Gemara is that if you take out the word midrabanan, then what comes out is that it's asmachta ninhu ulakula. And the truth is, there's other commentaries ask a question on this as well, because there's another Gemara that also seems to imply that it's biblical. That, for example, the obligation to stand, a kohen who blesses the Jewish people is really supposed to stand when he blesses the Jewish people. And that obligation to stand seems to be biblical. The Gemara learns it from la'amoid l'sharis. It says to stand and to do the service. And let me pull up that pasuk over here. Let's see, is it here? It says, it doesn't bring the pasuk. Dvarim Yud and Yud Ches. I'm going to bring it. It's surprising. This Gemara is supposed to bring all the verses. Let me pull up. Let me share. So the actual pasuk here. Let's just pull it up here. Dvarim Yud. So it says, at that time, Hashem separated the tribe of Levi to carry the ark, to stand before Hashem, to serve him, and bless using his name, until this day. So the verse clearly says to stand. And so the Gemara in Saita learns that you're supposed to stand when you do Berachos Chayim. Now, if that's in the Gemara there seems to imply like it's biblical. So it sounds like the biblical obligation of Birchas Koyanim should include the prohibition of not being drunk, because it's also learned from a hekesh, from this type of being in the same verse, juxtaposition, that it's of the words in the verse. So the other way of learning our Gemara is that the Gemara says it's asmachta. It only refers to the nazir part of it, and you don't read the word midrabanan because there seems to be some there seems to be a question about that word midrabanan, like if that's supposed to be there or not. So Asmachta ninhu ulakula, and you don't have the word midrabanan. And how do you know, according to this, that a kohen is not allowed to be drunk? So if you learn it this way, and I'm just sharing this with you because this is another um, this is a common view. In other words, this seems to be a very accepted view in halacha that it's biblical. It's a biblical prohibition. How do you know that a kohen can't be drunk? It's from the word la'amoid l'shares b'shem l'shares levarich b'shmai. That it says over there l'shares levarich b'shmai, that you compare a kohen who's blessing to a kohen who is doing the service in the Beis Hamikdash, and Kohen who does the service in the Beis Hamikdash is not allowed to be drunk. We know that famous law, Yayin v'Shecher al Teish, that says wine he cannot drink. So just like it says over there, he can't drink wine. It refers to a Kohen that blesses, that they're not allowed to drink, they're not allowed to be drunk and or drink wine, and bless the Jewish people. So we basically learn it from the law of the Kohen. Now, we don't learn it from the law of the Nazir. The Nazir is only an asmachta. It's only it's asmachta ninhu ulakula. We only learn from the Nazir a leniency. What leniency do we learn from the Nazir? From the Nazir, we learn that, that's not the main place where we're learning it from. We're learning it from the kohen that does the service in the temple can't be drunk. But the Nazir is allowed to have a blemish. That tells us that a kohen that blesses is also allowed to have a blemish. So that's basically what we're learning from Nazir. And but it's not the actual law is only like a smachta. It's only like a hint from Nazir that he can't be drunk. But really we learn it from we learn the law from the kohen that does the service in the temple. So according to that, it ends up that it's a biblical law that a kohen can't be drunk when he does the service, and according to that, I think it makes it a little more understandable how we have like rabbinic decrees on this. Yes, Moshe.
A kohen cannot have a visible moment or a wound or a scar or anything like that, but a Nazir can have one during the when he's duchening or when he's praying. Is that correct?
Not duchening, when he's
praying when he's
when he's a Nazir. Yeah, he's allowed. He can become a Nazir even if he has a blemish.
But the Nazir, it cannot be. The Nazir, it can be visible if it's a scar on his face or whatever.
He can look as ugly as they make him, and he's still a good Nazir, still a kosher Nazir.
But the Kohen cannot have that.
Kohen can't. The Kohen, as long as if it's a visible, and it's gonna be something that people are gonna be like lose their concentration because they're gonna be looking at it. That's a problem. The interesting thing is, what is the law nowadays where we put a talus over the face and over the kohen? The kohen has a talus covering it. So in this scenario, would a kohen who has an outright blemish, would he be allowed to do the service in the temple? Do the bless, not service in the temple. Would he be allowed to bless the people if he has because we wear talesim now? They didn't always do the talus covering, but normally a kohen that had a blemish couldn't do it because people will be looking at, if it's an outright blemish, he can't do the service. But nowadays the minhag is to wear a talus over them, so it could be that there may be room for leniency nowadays. But anyway, the bottom line is he can have a different type of blemish for sure, and that's what our Gemara is talking about. Got it?
Yes, thank you.
So in I think it's here in chapter 128 of the Shulchan Aruch. It talks about the blemishes that would prohibit a kohen to do the service. So if we just take a look here, 128, I think it's in 30. And the reason it says is because people are going to stare and gaze at it. And if it's in a place where they don't wear socks, even if he has a mum on his feet, on his legs, and even if his eyes tear a lot, or a person who's blind in one eye, but if everyone in the city knows him and recognizes him, that he has this blemish, and even if he's blind in two eyes, it's not a problem because everyone knows him. But if he only comes there once in a while, that would be a problem. So the amount of time he has to live there seems to be 30 days. Then in the halacha in paragraph 31, it says if the minhag of the place is to put a talus over their face, so even if the face and their hands have mums, have blemishes, he's allowed to do the berachas kayanim. That's the Beis Yosef says this. And davka, if his hands are inside the talus, but if he puts his hands out of the talus, then he wouldn't be allowed to. So basically, as long as the wearing of the talus and it covers it, you would still be allowed to do berachas kainim. The Mishnah Berurah talks about a case where what happens if the minhag is not to wear a talus, but he wants to wear a talus and change the minhag in order that he could do berachas kainim, and Mishnah Berurah is against it. Anyway, so that's the story about having a mum. Our Gemara's emphasis is really on a mum that's not, that's not revealed. This is, you see, these are mums that are all outright, people can see. But the mums that our Gemara is dealing with are mums or blemishes that are not revealed. And those type of blemishes would prohibit a kohen from doing the service, but would not prohibit a kohen from doing the blessing the Jewish people. Okay, so that really gives us a little understanding of this Gemara. And now we're going to move on to the next Gemara. So we're on page 27a, and we are by the two dots, 4 lines up, 4 lines down from the top of the page. So the 4th line of the page on page 27a, if you have an art scroll, we are on page probably 27a1. Let's make sure. 27. Yes, 27a1. We are on the 5th paragraph of the page. Elohein ma'amadis. These are the ma'amadis, and that was the Mishnah. The Mishnah said the ma'amadis, and then it jumped, interestingly enough, to another discussion, like what's the source that you're supposed to have ma'amadis? Now, what are ma'amadis again? Ma'amadis are the group of the community that are representing everyone else by being at the Beis HaMikdash when they bring the sacrifices, or the group that doesn't go to the Beis HaMikdash and they do extra prayers in their towns. So these are people that are called the representatives of the community, and they do what's called these ma'amadis. Now, the Gemara says, what did the Mishnah mean where it jumped to say, well, jumped into what's the source of the ma'amadis without telling us about the ma'amadis. It starts off saying these are the ma'amadis. This is what it is, and then it starts telling us a whole long speech about how do you know you're supposed to have ma'amadis. Let's focus. Why is the Mishnah not focused? It started telling us about what the ma'amadis are, and then it jumped into the source of the ma'amadis. That's not exactly a that's not really a smooth reading Mishnah. So the Gemara here says, brings the Elohein ma'amadis kli since it says tzavas b'nei Yisrael. That was the Mishnah chulu. The Mishnah started telling us that since it says this, therefore we know that you need to have ma'amadis. So the Gemara says, "My ka'amar." What did the Mishnah mean to say? What was it saying? It started talking about one thing and then it jumps to the source. So the Gemara answers, "Hachi ka'amar." This is what it meant to say in the Mishnah. Elohein ma'amadis. This is what ma'amadis are. Umatam tignu ma'amadis, which, in other words, this is what ma'amadis are. We'll soon explain. And what's the reason for the ma'amadis? Now the Mishnah sort of like goes off on a tangent and says, what is the reason for the ma'amadis? Since it says b'nei Israel since it says command the b'nei Israel and tell them, es karbani lachmi leishai, my sacrifice, my bread for a fire, for my fire. It says that in other words, command the b'nei Yisrael about my sacrifice. That's what God is saying. Now, if this is the b'nei Yisrael sacrifice, this is a communal sacrifice. So, how could it be that you're not there when it's being brought? You're not present. So the Gemara says. So the Mishnah then continues and says, so the prophets instituted, in order to fulfill this obligation, they instituted 24 mishmaros groups. They divided the Kainim and Leviim, and ultimately the Mishnah continues and says that there was a maimad in Yerushalayim of the Israelites. I'll call Mishmar and Mishmar for each of these Mishmaros, each of these groups, the Kainim and Leviim. So Haya maimad Yerushalayim, there was a maimad of the people in Yerushalayim, which means Shal Kainim, Shal Leviim, Shal Yisraelim, of the Kainim, Leviim, and Yisraelim. And they would be the emissaries, the representatives of the Jewish people, to be there when the sacrifice is being sacrificed. He gives man mishmar la'aloi. So when the time came for the group to go up, Kainim Leviim on the Yerushalayim, the Kainim and Leviim would go up to Yerushalayim and so on and so forth. And that's basically the Mishnah. So all the Gemara really did here was add a few words to the Mishnah to make it more readable. What are the few words that the Gemara added to the Mishnah? It added the words umatam titnu ma'amadis. What is the reason that we have ma'amadis? So in other words, the Mishnah doesn't just jump into the reason, it actually asks it as a question. In other words, we're soon going to explain what the ma'amadis are as follows. But before we get into it, the Mishnah says, but who says you need to have ma'amadis? Why do we need these representatives? So the Mishnah brought a verse that says this is a communal sacrifice, and communal sacrifice, that means we're all part of it, but we're not there. And that is a problem because we're not present for our sacrifice. And on that, we have the reason for the ma'amadis. So you have the Kainim and Leviim, then you have the Yisraelim, and the Mishnah, which mentions the ma'amadis, it mentions Kainim, Leviim, and Yisraelim. If you remember, when we learned the Mishnah, we mentioned that almost every part of the Mishnah had major debates among the commentaries. And one of them is, so it sounds like from the Mishnah that in addition to having the groups of Kainim and Leviim, they also had groups of Kainim, Leviim, and Yisrael. In other words, the simple assumption would be, in addition to having Kainim and Leviim, you also have Yisraelim, right? Israelites. You have Kainim and Leviim doing the services. The Kainim was doing the sacrifices. The Leviim were doing their songs and so on. The Israelites would go to be there as the representatives. That's what you would expect. But the Mishnah actually knocks us a little off the off track and says, in addition to having Kohanim and Leviim that the prophets established 24 groups, you also had Maimados with Kohanim, Leviim, and Yisraelim. So it sounds like the Maimad had Kohanim, Leviim, and Yisraelim. The representatives included Kohanim, Leviim, and Yisraelim. And according to some opinions, that's correct. According to other opinions, it doesn't really mean that. It means that there was a Maimad in Yerushalayim that had the Kohanim and Leviim that we mentioned earlier, doing their thing, not part of the Maimad. And the Yisraelim, that was really the Maimad. So it's sort of not as smooth. I think the other way, the first way of learning it is a little more smooth, that there actually was in the Ma'amades, Kohanim, Leviim, and Yisraelim, which is a little surprising. Why did you need Kohanim and Leviim? And we mentioned a pshat, an explanation, that that it's possible to learn that the Kohanim can't, a Israelite can't be a representative of the Kohen, because we are a nation of three groups, Kohanim, Leviim, and Yisraelim, and the Kohanim's representative needs to be a Kohen. A Levi's representative needs to be a Levi, and an Israelite's representative needs to be an Israelite. And that's that would be a way of explaining that opinion. And then it says, when the time comes, the Kohanim and Leviim would go to Yerushalayim, and people, the Ma'amados were people either who lived in Yerushalayim, or they were people who are nearby Yerushalayim, or and the other group of the Ma'amados would go into their cities. Now comes the next brisa. The Gemara now brings another brisa. Talks about the mishmaros. And this is really a surprising thing that we're going to see here. So listen up. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis learned in a brisa. Esrim v'arba mishmaros b'Eretz Yisrael. There were 24 mishmaros. Ushtei mesrei b'Yerichai. 12 in Yerichai. Now that is very surprising. What does Yerichai, where did Yerichai come in? Now, the Mishnah, the Gemara, I'm sorry, is very surprised also about this price. It wants to know, so there's not 24? There's really 36? How come we don't know anything about the 36 mishmaros, these groups of watching? In other words, these the Jewish people, the Kohanim and Leviim, were divided into 36 groups, 24 and 12. So the Gemara asks, Shtei Mesrei b'Yerichai, there's an extra 12 that are in Jericho. Nefishi Lahu Tuva. That would mean that there's too many, because we know of 24. We don't know of any more than 24. And the brisa itself started off saying there's 24. And then you jump and say, it says there's 24 in Eretz Yisrael, and then 12 in Yericho, but Yericho is part of Eretz Yisrael. So the Gemara answers, Shteim Esrei b'Yericho, I'm sorry, Ella. The Gemara answers with the word Ella. Ella, Shteim Esrei mehen b'Yericho. Means 12 of them are in Yericho. Now, what were they doing in Yericho, Jericho? I thought the whole goal is they're supposed to be doing the service. So the brisa continues and says, Higiyazman mishmar la'alos. Time came for the mishmar to go up to Yerushalayim, or to Eretz Yisrael, to Yerushalayim, to do the service. So Chatzi mishmar ha'yo'elam Eretz Yisrael Yerushalayim. Half of them would go to Eretz Yisrael, from Eretz Yisrael to Yerushalayim. V'chatzi mishmar ha'yo'ela li Yerichai. Half of them would go to Jericho. Today, in order, sheyasapku mayim u'mazon la'achehem sheb'Yerushalayim. In order that they could provide food for their brothers in Yerushalayim. The understanding here is definitely a little surprising. What exactly did they need to go to Yericho? Was there no food in Yerushalayim? Yerushalayim didn't have people living there, so there wasn't much food there. And how close is Yericho to Yerushalayim? But basically, what it sounds like was the catering hall was in Yerichai, and they had to cater it. They had to cook it there. The commercial kitchen was in Yerichai, and they would bring the food from Yerichai. They would be involved in the catering part, and they would bring that. Yes.
I have this entire problem with Yericho. I mean, Yericho was destroyed by
in time of Yoshua. Yeah.
So, and we were told never to
rebuild it.
To rebuild it. So how can, how does this
fit
with everything that we're reading?
Yeah. So there is a Ravid that explains in Tractate Talmud that somehow, with all the negative, with all the idea that we're not supposed to do anything in Yerichai, it doesn't mean that Yerichai, there's anything wrong with Yerichai. It's the opposite. Yerichai was considered like it has an element of Yerushalayim in it. And because it's so holy, it's like, and Yoshua didn't want anyone to forget about the miracle there. So he sort of like set it aside. It's almost like the truma. That's what the Ravid, I think the term the Ravid uses is like, it's the truma. This is like the truma of the whole Eretz Yisrael is like Yerichai. And this was our first fruits of the Bikurim of it's like the first, this is like the first fruits. So this is the first thing we conquered in Eretz Yisrael. And so it's really set aside for Hashem. And so so in other words, it's not like something negative about Yerichai. It's really a positive thing that there's a certain element of holiness. So it has an element of Yerushalayim in it, that it's a very special city. Now, so for some reason, and maybe it has something to do with that it's like a certain holiness there. So when their prayer, they're still representing the people by being in Yerichai. In any event, what it says here is that they basically would bring the food for the people who were going to Yerushalayim, and they would be in Yerichai. Now, one of the commentaries mentions that there would be like 3 days, part of the week, they would switch off with the other people. Some people were in Yerushalayim, they would switch off with them after 3 days, so then it ended up that everyone had a chance to be in both. But that's basically the understanding here.
Rabbi?
Now, yes, Moshe.
Was Yerichai, wasn't it an oasis of some sort?
What do you mean?
Initially, I thought maybe it was an oasis when it was conquered.
It was a city.
It was a city, but I thought it was also an oasis. Maybe that is why the food was, cooked there. That's why it was brought there to be cooked, and prepared.
What do you mean by the word oasis?
It was a place where there was, emblements that were growing, a lot of emblements, fruits and things such as that. It was not considered like a desert area, being
maybe that's true. It does say Ir HaTmarim, Yerichai Ir HaTmarim, like it was it makes sense. Even today, I think they do grow dates. Is that where I remember driving date palms? I remember driving along somewhere in Eretz Yisrael from Yerushalayim north, and we were passing by crazy amount of date palms, and they would have like sacks covering the dates in order, I guess, for the birds not to eat them or whatever. It was huge amount. That it could be that it was actually Jericho, but it does say somewhere about Yerichai is considered the city of tomorrow. So maybe that's the point, that there was a lot of that's an interesting point, Maisha, that maybe there was a lot of things that grew there, and they were able to make food there easier than than in Yerushalayim. I don't know. To me, it definitely seems surprising. Like, why weren't they in just making the food there? There's no catering there in Yerushalayim, but and also it seemed like a schlep to carry, and it says water. They also brought water, mayim umazon. I'm not sure. It definitely deserves to be looked into. I don't know if David's here. Steinsaltz, does the Rabbi Steinsaltz have anything about this? It seems a little surprising that they're going to schlep from Yerichai. But anyway, what I mentioned from the Riva does add a little a little salt and pepper to it about the little understanding maybe about the uniqueness of Yerichai. But anyway, that's what the Gemara says, and we'll continue to look into it. We're going to continue with the next piece. The Gemara says, "Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, kainam Levim Yisraelim akben as a korban." So Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel says that the Koyanim, the Levim, and the Yisraelim are all needed, and if we don't have them, they are ma'akev. They prevent the sacrifice from being kosher, from being accepted, from being valid. And those, you need to have them. There needs to be representation, and seemingly what it's referring to is the ma'amadais, which are the representatives had to be there. Which, if you learn, it means the Kainim, the Levim, and the Yisraelim. Then it's very understandable that they are all needed, and if they're not there, it messes up the sacrifice. Now, the other way of learning is the Kainim, Levim really were not part of the Maimed. It's really the Yisraelim who are part of the Maimed, and the Kainim did the service. So the understanding would be that if the Koyanim and Levium aren't there, so they can't really do the service. They need to sprinkle the blood. They need to anything after the shchita had to be done by a kohen, and the Levium had to sing. So if they weren't there, it would actually ruin the service. The other way of understanding it is that it doesn't mean it would ruin it. It would mean they would wait. Ma'akev could also mean that you have to wait and delay until they're there. So you wait until they arrive and fulfill the mitzvah in the most apropos manner, in the most honorable manner that it should have the people there, but not that it would prohibit, not that it would ruin it, or disqualify it. Now,
Rabbi, I think Mordechai might know. Mordechai, do you have something to say?
No.
Ah, okay. I saw your hand. That's why.
Okay, so that's the this is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel about how important it is for the ma'amados to be there to fulfill. In other words, this is like adding another. It's adding a little a sense of great importance to the ma'amados, that if it's not there, it could disqualify the whole sacrifice. If they aren't there, if they're not participating, the whole sacrifice could be ruined. Ma'akev the korban. Or they would wait until the people came. Now, Masnisa Tana, again, there were two opinions. One is that it actually disqualifies the sacrifice. The other is they would wait until the ma'amados would show up. Masnisa Tana, in a brisa, it was taught. Reb Shimon ben Elazar says, "Kainim Levim play sheer makbenas a korban." It's another a brisa which says it's slightly different. It adds that the Kainim, the Levium, and the instruments are ma'akev the korban. They are important, so important that if you don't have them, they're essential, and if you don't have them, it could disqualify the korban. Now, the the understanding is that the same would apply to Yisraelim and other places where it mentions this brisa. It does say Yisraelim. It's interesting that it doesn't say the Yisraelim, the Israelites, but they also would be included. Now, the Gemara wants to know, but my komiflagi, what are they arguing about? Reb Shimon ben Elazar and Reb Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Again, there's two statements. No, it's not a brisa. It's an argument of the rabbis of the Amoraim. Right, it's from the Amoraim. Shimon ben Elazar. Yeah. No, Reb Shimon ben Elazar is a brisa. I'm sorry. Reb Yehuda Amar Shmuel is not a brisa. Reb Shimon ben Elazar is a brisa. Okay. So we have Reb Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Reb Yehuda Amar Shmuel is an Amoira. He says that it doesn't mention the musical instruments, that if you don't have them, it ruins, it disqualifies the sacrifice. He says that the kind of Levim Israelim, that disqualifies, if you don't have them, it disqualifies the sacrifice. In a brisa, it was taught, the Reb Shimon ben Elazar says that the musical instruments, they're so essential as well. So that's what the Gemara is asking. What's the argument between these opinions? And why does Reb Shimon ben Elazar make such a big deal about the musical instruments? Reb Yehuda Amar Shmuel, who can't really argue on him, because Reb Yehuda Amar Shmuel is only a Amoira, but he obviously follows another view. But what is the source of this argument? So the Gemara answer is very simple. Mar Savar Ikar Shira Bapeh. Master holds that the main song that the Levites would do was the vocals. The musical instruments was not critical. It was the enhancement to the mitzvah, but it wasn't critical. However, Mumar Savar, in Master held, in other words, the other rabbi, Shimon ben Elazar, holds that Ikar Shira is Bakli. The main song is the musical instruments, and the people singing, that was additional. And this is a machlokes in other gemaras about what is the Ikar Shira. Is it Peh or Bakli? Is it what is the main part of the music that was done by the korban? Okay, now the Gemara, so that answers, that explains these two views, and this would give us an understanding. It's a Tanoic dispute, which answers the question that I touched upon. Like Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel is not allowed to argue on a Tana, except if there's another view of the Tanoim. And this is a famous argument of Tanoim, of the authors of the Mishnah. And so Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel is following that other view. And Reb Shimon ben Elazar argues. So this is these are the things that are ma'akev. They prevent the validity of the korban. The Gemara continues and says, Amar Reb Chama Bar Guria Amar Rav. Chama Bar Guria says in the name of Rav, Moshe tikan lam Yisrael shmeinim mishmaros. Moshe established 8 mishmaros. Arba me Elazar v'dalid me Isamar. 4 from Elazar and 4 from Isamar. If you remember, Aaron HaKohen had 4 sons, and 2 of them passed away when they were inaugurating the 8th day of the inauguration of the Mishkan. The 2 sons, Nadav and Avihu, passed away, and Elazar and Isamar were the leaders, were the kohanes of the time. Now Moshe understood, and we saw some sources in the Torah that you have to have the kohanim divided. There was rules how it should be. It was meant to be established a division of the kohanim in order that some would be in different times. There would be different kohanim doing the service. And so we saw a pasuk about it. That anything during the holidays, anyone could have access to. All the Kohanim had access. But besides the holidays, the Kohanim had different divisions. Now, Moshe was masakin this. There were 8 mishmaros that Moshe was masakin. He said there's 4 from Elazar's family and 4 from Isammar's family. That's how it started. And again, you have to keep in mind there were very small. There was a small group of Kohanim. There weren't many Kohanim at the time. Now it was only Elazar and Isamar and their families. Now Shmuel v'amidon al sheishes. Shmuel came and said, you know what? I guess the families grew, and Shmuel said we got to make 16. But David, and he said we need more, 24. Shenemar, as it says, Ishnaso arboim lamalchus David, on the 40th year of King David's reign, Nidrashu, it was seeked after, and Vayimotze Bahem Gibarei Chayil Biyazer Gilad, and they found men of Gibarei Chayil, men of valor, in Yazer Gilad, in some type of area in Gilad, which Gilad was a city, and they found these Kohanim and Leviim that they divided into these mishmaros. So that is the understanding of that verse, that they basically divided into these 24 groups. Now, the Gemara is going to have a question and says that we have a contradiction here. Meisvei, the Bnei Yeshiva asked the contradiction, the Yeshiva asked a contradiction from this previous statement that we had, Reb Chama Bar Guria, in the name of Rav, to from a brisa that seems to say something different. Moshe tiken lahem liYisrael shmoyne mishmaros. Moshe instituted 8 mishmaros. Arba me Elazar, arba me Isamar. So that fits very good. There's 4 and 4. 4 from Elazar's family, 4 from Isammar's family. Ba David u'Shmuel v'amidon al esrim v'yarba. David and Shmuel together made it 24. Shenemar hema yisa David u'Shmuel haraya b'monasam. They established it for all time. They established the amount of the mishmaros, which makes it sound like they were together established it, and not that David HaMelech was the one who did 24 and Shmuel really did 16. It sounds like they did the same thing. So the Gemara answers that it's not a proof, it's not a contradiction. That one place it says Shmuel made 16 and David made 24. The other one it says they both made it 24. So my answer is not a problem. Hachi ka'amar, this is what it means to say. Miyasoidai shel David u'Shmuel haramasi ha'amidu al esrim v'arba, which basically means based on the Yesoid, the teaching or the ruling of David and Shloimeh haramasi and Shmuel haramasi, that Shmuel from Ramah, that it ended up being 24, meaning that it, although it initially started at 8, but ultimately, based on Shmuel, based on David, it became 24. Did they both decide 24? No. But they both raised it, and ultimately it became 24. In other words, they both played a role in making it and ultimately making it 24. How did they both play a role? Because Shmuel added to it and then David added to it. Hanya Idach, we have another brisa. Moshe tikin lahem Yisrael sheishas mishmaros. Moshe established 16. Now this is a different opinion. And this is another brisa, and it says Moshe did 16. He instituted 16. Shmoyne me Elazar, Shmoyne me Isamar. 8 from Elazar and 8 from Isamar. Before we said 4 from Elazar, 4 from Isamar. Here, this is a different view. And Sharabu b'nei Elazar al b'nei Isamar, when the children of Elazar became more numerous than the children of Isamar, they divided it differently. They established the amount of 24. In other words, initially there were 16, and now there were 24, but not because it was evenly distributed, because the Bnei Elazar had so many more families. And it says, Shenemar, as it says, Vayimotzu Bnei Elazar Rabim L'Rashi Akbarim Bnei Isamar. They were many more than the children of Isamar. Vayechalkum L'Bnei Elazar Rashim Leveis Avos Shisha Aser. So they divided them into 16. So they were 8. In other words, the Bnei Elazar was 8, and the Bnei Isamar was 8. And Bnei Elazar, they said, we're going to double the amount that we have from your family. And the people of Isamar, we're just going to keep it the way it is. So your family is going to double, to double the amount of division of watches, Shisha Aser. But Bnei Isamar, to the children of Isamar, the base of Isam, Shmoina, it's just going to stay at 8 as it always was. And it says in another pasuk, base av echad achos le'Elazar, v'yachos achos le'isamar. What does that mean? That an extra measure will be for Elazar, and for Isamar, it'll be the way it was. So Elazar got extra. Now, we really know that from the previous verse. My v'yomer. So what do we need the second additional verse that it just brought? The second verse is just a verse later, but what does it need to tell us? So v'chi tema, maybe you're gonna say ki hechi denefisha b'nei Elazar, hachanami denefisha b'nei Isamar. Maybe you'll say that just like Elazar's descendants doubled and increased, so it became many. Literally means became many. So also b'nei Isamar became many. So Shemaina me kara arba habu, and so maybe you'll say that maybe the 8 that Elazar, that Isamar was given, maybe it initially really was 4, and they doubled and they doubled. They were initially 4, they became 8. They were initially were 8, they became 16. So maybe you'll say that that the doubling, the flourishing, the proliferation was by both families. So on that it says, Tashima come in here that no, only Elazar's family flourished and grew, and Isamar's family just stayed the same. That's basically. So the Gemara says, you see from this brisa that Moshe Rabbeinu established 16, not 8. So this brisa disagrees with what we learned before. And the problem is Rav Chama Bar Guria said in the name of Rav that it was 8. He's an Amoira. He's not allowed to really argue on a Taanis. But the Gemara answers very simply that that he also has a source. There was another brisa that we brought that it says 8. So the Gemara initially says Tiyuvta Rav Chama Bar Guria. This seems to prove Rav Chama wrong. My answer is Amalach Rav Chama Bar Guria Tanoi. It's an argument of the Tanoim. I hold like that opinion that says that there were 8. So there's 2 opinions in the brisa, meaning of the Tanoim, of the authors of the Mishnah. There were two different opinions, and I follow that view. And that's it. That's basically the story of the Mishmaros, the number of Mishmaros. We're going to stop here. Have a wonderful Shabbos and a very Freilich and Purim. And I will see you, Emet Hashem, on Monday morning.
Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Have a good Shabbos.